Welcome to the TRXL podcast. I'm Evan TRXL, and in this episode, I am joined by Dan Chuparkoff, who is one of the world's leading experts on AI, innovation, and the future of work. As a technology leader at Google, McKinsey, and others, Dan led transformations for teams in every industry as the world navigated 3 decades of technological change. He knows firsthand that the people who leverage the power of technology will outperform the people who don't, something I think that this audience probably knows a thing or two about. And today he shares about change, creativity, and how leaders can prepare their teams and organizations for a future powered by AI and innovation. He draws from decades of experience in software and product development and shares valuable insights into why traditional industries like architecture need to embrace reinvention. We also talked about how to practically foster innovation in the face of resistance, the dual nature of technology, innovation through separation, AI's true potential, diversity as a catalyst for innovation, reframing learning, the importance of cross-pollinating ideas and talents from different industries to drive innovation, and more. One of the main themes of this episode is about change agents. I'll put out a challenge to you, dear listener, and it is that change agents must lead their teams through technological change. Can you identify who the change agents are in your organization? Maybe it's you. Anyways, stick around to the end of the episode because I'll wrap things up and tell you why I think this theme is a really important takeaway from today's conversation. Lastly, you can really help out the podcast by sharing these episodes with your colleagues and by commenting on and sharing my LinkedIn posts. And you can leave a comment over on YouTube to chat with the other listeners. As usual, there's an extensive amount of additional information in the show notes, so be sure to check them out. You can find them in your podcast app if you're a paid member, and if you're a free member, you can find them at the website, which is trxl.co. So now, without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Dan Chuparkoff. Dan, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Evan. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to the discussion today. Architecture goes deep back into my personal history, and I'm looking forward to talking about how, architects are seeing change, how non-architects, other designers are seeing change, and the technology progress in the world, it's impacting us all. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Me too.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I love that you're here, and I've had your other brother half on this show before, and I love Tom's stance that architecture is his hobby, and he shows up every day to practice his hobby. I think that's a really cool attitude to have, and it's pretty infectious. He's just a great guy, and so I will put a link to that episode in the show notes so people get the full familial effect here. But Dan, you're in a different industry, and I know that there are obviously crossovers, but maybe you can tell us a bit of your backstory and so that we know kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been a technologist for 30 years, I guess, professionally. I was a product manager for most of that and a software engineer for a tiny bit of it at the beginning. But I sort of stumbled into technology accidentally. I actually had originally intended to be an architect. And I got an internship my senior year of high school for the Hillsborough County School Board in Florida. We were designing schools all over the county. And as an intern, I pretty much all they would let me do was draw parking lot lines. Like they would draw this whole plan, and I'd get the site plan, and I'd try to figure out how many parking spaces would fit in the parking lot. And so I spent a good chunk of a semester drawing parking lot lines. And I was filing plans away in, those architecture plan cabinets.
The flat files,
the big, long flat files.
Right.
I'm like in our storage room, like filing plans away one day. And I meet this guy that I hadn't met before. His name was Mr. Pak. And I introduced myself. I told him I was getting to know all the people around. And I'm like, how come I haven't seen you? And he said, that's because my office is down here. We're like on another level, practically in the basement. And he shows me where he works. And the first thing I see is he's got a computer sitting on his desk. He also has one of those old style drafting boards on the slant, but he's got a computer and a plotter that was like plotting at the time. It's making all this noise. And that's why they shoved him in the basement because his plotter was making so much racket.
Yep.
Right. And I'm like, what is this? What does it do? And he's like, oh, it's just for CAD. And I had never heard the acronym CAD before. And he showed me what he's doing, and it was AutoCAD Revision 9, which back then was the first one that let you spin the design around. You could look at it in 3 dimensions. And and he showed me how to work it. I spent a week with him, and then he showed me I could copy paste parking lot spaces. And now we say the words copy paste all the time now, but like in 1986, that was like magic.
It still is if you actually think about it, right?
Right.
Yeah, we do take it for granted, though.
Yeah, so I go back upstairs to where my normal desk is, and I finish my project in ink and Mylar. If I make a mistake, I got to tear the whole thing up and start over. And I'm looking around, and all these architects are drawing on Mylar and ink. I'm like, hey, does anyone know about Mr. Pock in the basement? Like, when are we getting more computers? And the architects at the time, they weren't ready for that. They didn't understand that the drawings that came out of that thing would get better. They didn't understand that like the ability to share digital designs, across stakeholders and cities would be dramatically better. And so they for the most part rejected that thing and resisted it. I saw that was going to change the future of architecture, and I changed my major in alignment with that. Like I want to make software that can do that to all the other industries.
Interesting.
And so that became a 35-year-old love with technology way back then.
Wow, that's it's interesting, and you even make me think of like a basic tool that we have today, which is for me not a basic tool, which is a clipboard manager, even where you can copy lots of stuff and then go over here and then pick which one you want to paste in where, and like just the amount of like how long did it even take us to get from a single copy paste to multiple copy paste, and what a big jump that was. There's still so many people that don't even use a basic tool like that, right? Because they don't even know it exists. But I think that's part of it too, is right. You don't see the potential because you don't know it exists, but then once you know that it exists, you're also kind of up against this existential threat of who's going to replace me with this? Will it replace me? And there's all of those kinds of, and so a lot of things haven't changed in that regard, like with what you're saying.
Yeah, it's just a same problem happening over and over again. Regardless of what role you have or what industry you're in, like we're all facing that constant tool that helps us and threatens us at the same time, and that can be terrifying.
Well, let's expand on your credibility. Where did you go from there?
Yeah, so I started as a software engineer at a small marketing services company that most people have never heard of. Gradually, I then tried some startups and then a digital agency, and then I worked at a company called Atlassian that makes software for developers. And then I ended up at McKinsey & Company and then at Google. Finally, at Google, I worked on Android operating system things. If you make mobile apps, you probably used a bunch of my tools, Android Studio and Crashlytics and Firebase and things like that. So
nice.
That's the 32-year abbreviated version, but ended up at Google, actually wearing my Google vest right now today for the video listeners. Yeah, it was fun. I saw some big companies and some old companies and some startups and some massive enterprises, and it was an amazing journey.
And your brother's an architect, and so I'm sure you guys talk about kind of the let's just say the contrast between what you've seen in the technology industry. Obviously, your brother Tom is very technologically oriented in the design side of architecture and leveraging those kinds of tools that we talk about on this show all the time. But I'm curious, like from your perspective, when you're working at a company like Google, and from my point of view, having never stepped foot in a Google office, I mean, I'm sure that there's some of the same issues that we're probably going to talk about today, even, call it plaguing, call it whatever you want, but these large incumbent, Google's been around for how long now? When did Google start? It's got over 25 years, right?
Yeah, almost 30 at this point.
Right. And so it's like this idea of disruption but also they spend a lot of money on R&D, a lot of money on innovation and things like that, and they're constantly trying to come up with the next best thing. And they've had some big moonshots, and they've also, I'm sure, just thrown a bunch of stuff away, right?
Right.
But so there's like this, it's all happening. It's everything everywhere all at once, right? All of these different things are going on in the soup pot. And then I think about like the contrast of, and I'm just going to generalize and say most architecture firms are just kind of like, oh, how can we do what we do a little bit better, but not disrupt how we do it,
Right.
and I think that there's probably, you probably share a lot of stories with him about that, and I'm sure that there's some, oh yeah, I see that, but then there's probably a lot of, there are some differences in the way technology companies operate compared to, especially really established architecture firms, even though they have a lot of resources, and I could probably at the same time say that they're the ones spending the most money on the R&D when it comes to, not disrupting themselves or, being the ones who disrupt themselves instead of somebody else doing it to them.
Right.
But from Google's point of view, and just being like this technology company that has even put its toe in the water of AEC a few times, I mean, what's been your experience with just kind of seeing how this has played out over the last 2 decades?
Yeah, I think so. The first thing I'll say to just try to normalize what Google is like a little bit more for people. Some people look at Google and they're like, they have $1 trillion, they have hundreds of thousands of really smart people, like they can do things there that I can't do. But once you're on the inside, you see that they're actually just a normal big enterprise like many others. Inside, they have small teams that have like no budget to work with, and they're scrounging for people and headcount. Then they have big legacy things that have been running for 20 years, and they're afraid to touch anything because they don't want the revenue to dip at all, because that could be devastating for them. So first, Google has a lot of the same things going on that many other small and medium and big enterprises have as well. The second thing I'll say is, fundamentally, as part of Google's life, I think because they sort of were born out of the internet, and also at that moment, the way we searched for things on the internet shifted from the AOL, Yahoo portal style thing to a consumer-driven search, right? It was very guided before. Like there were 15 categories, and you could click on finance or you could click on travel, and you would see the travel portal, and suddenly users had control to go anywhere on the internet they wanted. And so Google saw that even brand new things could get completely disrupted if you're not constantly making them better and better and better. At the time, Alta Vista was the dominant search engine, and it had only been around for 4 years, and they just got left in the dust.
Right.
And so Google saw this sort of existential need for change that a lot of people don't see, or maybe in their industries, it's not quite as fast as 4 years, right? Maybe of 20 years or maybe 40 years before you're just left in the dust. But at some point you will get left in the dust if you aim for stasis, right? If you just try to hold things where they are, so that you don't take risks, minimize disruption and bad choices, then you'll probably be fine for a while. In technology, that for a while is maybe only 5 years. And in architecture, maybe it's 25 years. I don't know what the number is exactly, but it's not forever.
Yeah.
And so, people that try to hold the line and keep things stable and risk-free for too long will get left behind eventually.
Yeah. I mean, one of the main topics I wanted to discuss with you today is change, right? A big, broad topic, but just really how we deal with it as an industry, as individuals, and then how other industries, like you're talking about, kind of just a different perspective completely, which is like, if we're not changing, we're going to die, kind of a thing.
Right.
And then there's other industries like ours, right, where it's maybe not as urgent of a we're not going to die, we're going to be fine, and then it kind of leads to you kind of forget that you needed to look outside and continually kind of survey what's going on, because you're busy, you got deadlines, right? You've got all these things that you've got to do today, and so I mean, Well, I'm curious before we start really getting into the topic of change, because I think this goes way beyond architecture. I mean, we're seeing it with the government. We're seeing like there's people like it's literally freaking out, but there's also kind of this idea like something actually can't get better until the one that's there is completely broken or dismantled or burned to the ground, right? It's like so there's all of this kind of floating around in my head too. But maybe you can kind of tell us your new focus since Google, and so we can kind of frame the conversation around your expertise.
Yeah, that sounds good. What I started to notice about 2 years ago at Google is, first of all, I liked going to conferences and speaking on a stage to an audience about stuff that I thought about the world. And so I started doing that a little bit more. And, meanwhile, back at Google, I was helping my team. I led a team that had about 150 people on it. And so I was helping my team navigate change and figure out what new stuff to do and figure out what bad stuff to stop doing. And I sort of realized, hey, the rest of the world needs some of that leadership too. And so if I could combine my love for speaking at conferences with my desire to be a leader of teams in a world of constant change, then I could do my most fun thing and the thing I was best at the same time. And so I quit Google a year and a half ago, and now I just help teams all over the world to navigate new technology changes. And right now that means AI a lot of the time to a lot of the people. So we're talking a lot about AI. But, in 6 more years, we'll be talking about how robots are helping to do stuff, take our trash out or bring us our medicine or whatever they do. And so that, so that constant technology, revolving door of helpers, assistants, is never going away. And so I just do that now. I'm independent. I have a company called Reinvention Labs, and we're just doing research on, how change is happening in each industry and what that's going to mean for the people that are trying to be successful there. And so that's what I do. And that's what we're kind of going to talk about mostly today, because that's what I do every day.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean this idea of change and disruption, I mean these are all kind of words that for a lot of people are super uncomfortable. And then there's others who are super comfortable with it because I mean like your job is to help people get comfortable with it so that they can do something about it, right? And I think about kind of the pace of innovation, and maybe we can start here, is just what have you noticed with the pace of innovation and change just in the last couple of years?
Yeah. So it definitely, there's on one side of the argument that the potential changes available to us is growing exponentially and that's speeding up. But at the same time, the amount of change accepted into organizations is actually throttled because of leadership change out. Right? Like a person who is whatever, I'm 55. I'm, my age, I'm a leader at Google or any other organization. I have maybe 8 or 9 years of leadership left in me, and then I'm going to retire. I don't need to change that much if I'm the leader, right? So I'm just going to ride it out.
And you don't have to enable it either, right?
Right. I'm just coasting on whatever laurels we we built up in the meantime. Then 10 years from now, I retire, and then the person that I've been grooming to take my spot takes over. And they're probably 15, 20 years younger than me. They're more comfortable with the digital age. They're more comfortable with risks. They have like 900 iPhone apps on their phone, so they don't care about new tool fatigue and stuff like that. So they lead my company in a completely different way. And so that generational flip in leadership actually is the thing that drives change more than the availability of new technology. And generational leadership is throttled by, age and generation size and stuff like that. So what you'll probably see is in any 22-year span, most organizations aren't forced to change. But then outside of that span, when they get to 25 or 30 years, they start to see that they're competing now against organizations that are led by people that have a different technology adoption attitude, mindset. And when you start competing against those people, you start drifting back. unless you start making those changes too. So that's kind of the dual dichotomy of change, both speeding up and stuck at the 22-year point at the same time.
This idea of like being almost entitled to be in business is so weird to me, right? Because I mean, you're competing in architecture where I'm coming from, you're competing against other firms who are roughly doing the same things that you are. And it's like, we're hitting these revenue goals, we're hitting our teams are trying to balance fees versus, billable hours and all these things. And it's difficult to actually, you got to change everything if you want to change. I mean, I'd be curious to hear what you kind of advise people there, because it's really difficult to change it all, and it's hard to change little pieces of it in the machine as it's moving and carrying all that momentum.
Yeah. I've been fortunate enough to be part of some sort of like dramatic shift in a business's business model and technology adoption two times. The first time I was part of a startup that got acquired. We had 35 people or so, and we were doing our thing, and it was kind of new and cool. And then we got bought by this much larger organization. And so naturally we got folded into that organization, and we started to look for efficiencies. And we took some of our things that had been working that enabled us to take risks and reinvent in the market, and we lost some of those things. Because now we were folded into this bigger machine, and now any risks that we took impacted the risks of the much bigger organization, right? And so that actually slowed us down a little bit, and the new cool stuff that we were doing when I first started there started to become harder and harder. On the other end of the spectrum, maybe 12 years later, I was working in a big company that wanted to reinvent itself, but was struggling to because of the mothership and our legacy products and customers. And so instead of just trying to do it anyway, in spite of all these risks and challenges, we created a little team that was separate. We took about 20 of us and got a different office. We worked in a different building, not too far away, just down the street. But we had our own culture, our own mindset. Like, we were shielded both legally and financially, like, by creating this new entity that had better risk-taking practices, because we had
and appetite,
legally
right?
separated. Yeah, exactly. And we knew that we weren't resting on the revenue of the mothership, right? We had to make or break what we were trying to do there. And so, we were hungry, and we took more risks, and we reinvented things, and it was actually dramatically successful. So, thinking about that is like, when you are trying to drive some dramatic change, first, just create a pilot team. Give them a little more freedom than you're normally used to in your normal culture. And if it works, gradually grow that team. Right? Send some more people over there, start doing a little bit more, start bigger customers. Little by little, that new team just becomes the organization, right? And that's a much better way to try to just gradually create change in a much bigger risk-averse organization.
When I was leading our digital practice team at the firm that I was at, we talked a lot about digital practice.
Yeah.
But I always would reinforce, it's like, someday we're just going to call it practice again, right? Like you start at calling it something so that everybody knows what you're talking about, but it's going to be so influential. And like you're saying, like the balance tips at some point where it becomes the bigger thing, because the way you used to do things is falling off the back of the conveyor belt, right?
Yeah, and both things coexisting is super normal, and it shouldn't feel weird to people on either side, right? Like the existing product still has customers that expect those existing things, and those customers will want to be customers for a long time. It's okay that starts shrinking, as long as people have another place to go as the new world, or the new digital world, the new AI powered world, starts to become a bigger and bigger part of the business.
It reminds me, the example that comes to my mind immediately is when Steve Jobs started the Mac team to develop a completely different computer than the 2Es and, the Apple IIs
Right.
that were out there. And they had to do the same thing that you said. They had to move into a different building because there's a lot of naysayers in the existing organization, and there's a lot of influence about, well, we're going this direction. Why are you doing that over there? And you actually have to create that separation at some level that you're talking about because it's unlikely that everybody's going to be on the same page that this is a good idea. And there's no guarantee that it's going to be successful anyway, right? And so
Right.
that separation, I think, is a key component of what you're talking about.
Yeah, completely agree. Because yeah, there are no guarantees that it's going to work. In fact, most of the time it does not work, right? Like most new things that organizations try aren't successful.
Yeah.
And so, that takes a different appetite for risk personally, a different like family situation, like all those things can be different.
Right.
So, while you're in those intense moments of risk, let the people that are comfortable in that world like inhabit it by themselves for a little while they're trying to figure it out.
And that fear is so real that it keeps a lot of people from trying it, right? But I just want to reinforce here that it's like either way you're going to learn something.
Right.
It could be successful. It might not be. No matter what, progress will get made. It's not like if it doesn't work, that is a complete failure. We don't get anything out of it. Right.
Right. Figuring out some things that don't work is an important thing that more organizations should do.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break from the conversation to tell you about AVAIL. Is your team struggling to find the BIM assets they need? AVAIL's content management system simplifies access to all of your firm's content in one easy-to-use platform. No matter where your files live or what type of files they are, you can easily search and access them from AVAIL. Now, designers can consistently find and reuse all types of content. So what does that mean? Well, standards compliant models and drawings are easier to create. The documentation process is less chaotic. New hires are easier to onboard. Projects are delivered faster with fewer errors. You get the idea. Visit getavail.com to try AVAIL for free and request a free demo. That's getavail.com, GETAVAIL.com. My thanks to AVAIL for supporting this episode of the TRXL podcast. And now let's get back to the conversation. How would an architecture firm, I mean, there definitely are examples of, and I've interviewed people on the show who have done this. Like I think of like, there's a structural engineering firm, Thornton Tomasetti, who started what they called Core Studio, which grew out of their advanced modeling group. And I mean, so it really was kind of like they incubated this thing, but what kinds of advice would you say like helps get people in the mindset of okay, I think we've kind of established why that could be important, but then there's the actual how do you do it? And architecture firms are not set up to be incubators. They're not like some of them think like that. They think hackathons and they think incubate ideas and they think turn those into businesses, and they think about it that way, maybe through experience, but a lot of them haven't. So I mean, is there anything that just comes out from you that when you talk to firms like this?
Yeah, I think the first thing is even before there's any kind of a formal practice, whether you have an incubator, whether you have like a next generation project team or anything that's formal and getting resources, just supporting the notion of learning some new things or trying some new experiments is the first thing culturally that's important. Before you can do it procedurally and formally with a whole new division of your company, first you have to like get people comfortable just trying new things for no reason, right? Like getting a software subscription that you're not sure you need yet, just to start kicking the tires and see like, if you had this new thing, what would you do with it?
Yeah.
And most people flip the learning until after the decision was made. Mm-hmm. They're like, okay, we're going to decide to get Revit. And nobody's used it yet, but we had this big committee and they decided that it's worth the $5 million or however much Revit costs. I don't know.
A lot.
Right. But like they make this formal declaration first and then they give everyone the new tool and then everybody's thinking there, shit, now I have to learn it. Now it's part of my job. Now
on top of my other job. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so way before that, you need like a sandbox to play in, right? Like get some new tools for a week. Just get the trial and say like, hey, next week is playing around with new tools week, and just let people explore a little bit, or give them, at the company Atlassian that I worked at, we had a $500 a year budget to just buy some software that we thought might be helpful. Like we could get a new trial single person account of whatever we wanted. There was no approval process as long as we were under that cap. And that allowed us to play around with new tools like HubSpot before they were big. Just kick the tires and see like, could this help me do my job better? And the people on the ground, they're the ones that usually know if it can actually do their jobs better.
Right.
And we
That's
sometimes
not being
pulled
dictated to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I also think about like the Google example of 20%. I don't know that they still do this, right? But this idea of 20% of your time was used for side projects. Some of those really paid off for them, right? Gmail was an example of one of those projects that somebody was coding, what is it, 1 day a week or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. That practice still exists. For those listeners that don't know, Google's 20% time is an informal project or process that just says 1 day a week you're allowed to work on anything you want. It doesn't have to be your formal team. It doesn't have to be the product that you're assigned to. What actually happens is sometimes a person will just take a training class and they're just going to disappear every Wednesday afternoons for a while. Sometimes 4 or 5 people will get together every Friday and say like, hey, we could maybe create a new project here. Do you want to try it? And they'll do that for a while. And you can spend some amount of your time. It's not always 20%. It's not universally applied. But what it is an awareness that learning new things is maybe not just as important as your day job, but more important than your day job.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not a distraction from the work. Your work is a distraction from the R&D.
Interesting.
And because the R&D stuff that you're doing, that's the next 25 years of your company's revenue. Like that's dramatically impactful time. And a lot of people think about it in the opposite way, where it's, it's getting in the way. We don't have time for that. We have customer deliverables and you have to keep your utilization up.
Yes.
And, all those things are hard.
It's the first time I've ever heard that being mentioned. So I'm really glad that you mentioned it. And I'm also curious if you could kind of expand on expectations around these side projects, because I think a lot of times it's like, well, if every single person who participates doesn't bring something back to us that was quote unquote worth it, then they get cut off and somebody else needs to. But I don't think it was like that. I mean, tell me how it worked.
Yeah, it's certainly if you're spending if you're spending money that isn't time at Google on a 20% project, for instance, you and me, we start a new startup and we have servers running now and we have users logging into some product that we're not even charging for. We're starting to consume organization money at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's fine as long as we have a monetization plan. And as long as our user adoption is growing and those people are referring new people in and we have organic adoption, and that demonstrates that the product that we built has value. Outside of that, if it's just me and you spending some of our own time, that's just education. And there's not a great way of measuring that education made you smarter or didn't.
The ROI.
So, yeah, right. But Google has a sort of, empowering trust approach to measuring that. And if you're doing stuff that you feel like is making you better, and you always have to explain it to your boss and, talk to your boss about what you're doing and what you're getting out of it. And so as long as you can confidently have that conversation, then you can get a little autonomy to try and learn new things. So that's, I think, the two sides of that. If you're spending money, there has to be real, demonstrable customer growth. If you're not, if it's just for educational purposes, then you have a normal leadership conversation with your normal boss, like you do about other things you try.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about it also from the context of it could become a thing, and the company gets the thing, they get the benefit of the thing, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not going to get snatched up by somebody else outside
Right.
because it's your
Yeah,
IP at that point, right? You've basically paid for
yeah.
the R&D of it.
Right. And now imagine you're Google and Evan and Dan, we started to create this side project and Google didn't actually believe in it, but we did, and they wouldn't let us work on it anymore. So you and I quit and we start our own startup and we get, $8 million of investment and then we build our own product and one day Google wakes up and we're competitors.
Right.
Right. And so, invest in your own people because, they'll invest
Somebody
in
else
them.
will if they if they have the chance. Yeah.
Right.
I just don't see that this kind of idea is really taking hold in the architect or AEC industry, right? And I a lot of it comes from where we've come from and how we've always operated, but also it's just not like the way that we're taught to think about our companies as design problems or even as an employee about how you would think about contributing to your company and making the argument to do that.
Yeah, it's I think one of the things we'll talk a little bit more about like creativity and technology and the AI revolution and what that's going to do. But like one of the things that makes me optimistic about the problem that you just observed is as we start using technology to propagate our design productivity, to help us do more things, help us do things faster, help us make more complex designs, more levels of detail for those designs. Like we start using technology as a dramatic productivity accelerator. Then we actually start becoming technology companies. And the things that you're doing that take new tool adoption and take experimentation and educational experiments, those things all start to look just like it looked inside of Google or inside of any other software startup I've worked. The more we sort of technology empower the world, the more companies that traditionally don't feel like they're technology companies are actually becoming technology companies, and they'll start to benefit from hackathons and software acquisitions just like all the others, I think.
So to get ahead of that curve, or if that's like of super interest to somebody, do you feel like they really need to potentially hire people from outside of the architectural training and background and kind of typical structure of a firm to get that expertise in to help them get to that point faster, or is that something that can be done from inside?
I think it should probably be done both ways, right? I think you should cross-pollinate with technologists or scientists or mathematicians or artists from other industries because those people will have done some experiments that you haven't done. But you also shouldn't let them come in and take over completely because they don't know your industry as well as you do. So from the inside, you should also, merge those two streams together. So you get, industry validated thinking and vision, right? Because you know where your architecture industry is trying to go. And then these other people will give you new tools and practices that maybe unblock some things that are blocking the road to that place.
There's an example that came to my mind when you were saying that, which was there was like a healthcare studio, and the healthcare studio really, really, really wanted to only hire healthcare architects. And I get that, right? Like there's an efficiency there, there's experience there, and so therefore you can maybe get a better product than you're used to producing, maybe faster. And at the same time, I think what you're actually talking about here is you're talking about the cross-pollination of ideas and experiences, because as a designer of architecture, I wanted my team to be extremely diverse and not have only worked on one project typology, because they're going to bring something to the table that I would have never thought of. And there's kind of a bit of a battle in those two different ways of thinking. And I think that's probably going on all over the place.
Yeah, I 100% agree that it is. I think if you're doing work that's really close to the same every time, and you're trying to get it done faster and cheaper, and maybe incrementally better, then getting people that have done that thing over and over again is the best way to do that. But if you're trying to do something brand new, some of your like legacy experience gets in the way of reinventing the way you do those things. And so, bringing somebody in that's only worked on, I don't know, schools instead of hospitals, or the other way is easier for me to imagine, right? Somebody that's designed emergency rooms thinks about efficiency of room movement and moving patients in and out and cleanliness in ways that like other architects don't know. And so, you bring hospital architects into auto mechanic architecture, right? They would create a body shop that was magical, right? And that would be amazing. And I don't think people are doing that enough. And I think that cross-pollination can breed some new invention, some rethinking of old ways of doing stuff.
I think it applies, way beyond design. And I mean, I'm not trying to contrast what you're saying at all. It's like, I feel like an architect should be on the board of every different kind of community group there is out there, because the way architects think is so different than the way everybody else got their training and the way that they do thinking. Yeah. And that to me is a huge advantage that architects have. And it's a beautiful service to these other organizations. Like if there's somebody on, it's not even just like city planning, which is still kind of in your wheelhouse, right? But it's like something else completely, like the way your church operates, for example, or the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts or anything like that. It's like you have just a different approach to problem solving. And I think we could, as architects, could do the same, right? We could get as much out of that as we could give to it in another context by bringing in the kinds of people that you're talking about who have just this very big difference in experience.
Yeah. Totally agree. Generally, diverse thinking, it often unlocks new ideas that wouldn't have been there before. Mm-hmm. And that diversity can be, the kind of cross-industry diversity. It can also sometimes just be age diversity. Like bring a brand new person in, like letting an intern sit in your board meeting for a while and just talk, what do you think? Right? As a person that grew up with an iPhone in your pocket as a, 22-year-old, what do you think about how you navigate spaces, how you solve problems? That unlocks whole new ways of thinking sometimes. And so, there's a lot of use of the word diversity a lot of the time right now, but most people don't think about it in the way of cross-industry diversity or cross-generational diversity. We're not doing that as much as I think we could.
The typical mindset is like that the young people are gonna learn from the old people, but it's also that is bi-directional in this example, right? It's I'm sure I've brought this up on the podcast before, but there's a thing I've heard of, and somebody can fact check me on this, but it's like this Japanese corporate meeting culture, which is the youngest people, so the interns, for example, get to do all the speaking in the meeting first. And it's because then they're not going to go against what somebody who's been there for a long time is going to say, because they don't know what they're going to say. And so there's as long as they have this, they feel safe enough to share and not get stepped on by doing it, right? This is used as a tool by the older generations who run these companies to get new ideas and make it a safe place to do that. And so you kind of need all that for that to actually work, right? Because otherwise it's only going to work the first time, and then somebody's going to get stepped on and they're like, I'm never going to talk again in these meetings because, right, I just got smashed.
That didn't work out very well for me.
But I thought that was a really interesting kind of strategy and how to unlock those kinds of interactions in those meetings.
Yeah, completely agree. I hadn't actually heard that before, but I love that analogy.
And I don't know if it's true again, but if it isn't, we should all do that.
Yeah, it's really great.
Let's take a short break from the conversation to invite you to join the most influential technology leaders in the AEC industry at Confluence. Composed of in-person events and a podcast co-hosted by yours truly, Confluence is designed to foster conversations between AEC firms and technology companies so they can learn, share, and engage with each other to support industry innovation. Software company AVAIL, which creates content management solutions for the AEC industry, started hosting Confluence events in 2019 to understand what firms are needing, wanting, and thinking around technology. To learn more about Confluence, explore upcoming events, and listen to podcast episodes, go to confluence.getavail.com. My thanks to Confluence for supporting this episode of the TRXL podcast. And now, let's get back to the conversation. One thing I wanted to talk about with you was just kind of the reason I wanted to go into kind of the pace of change was because, I think that we're seeing that behaviors, workflows, skills that were relevant just a few years ago maybe aren't as relevant or just aren't as needed now. Yeah. And I mean, you have a huge focus on what's going on with AI, and you're really keeping your fingers on the pulse in that. And that's where we're seeing a lot of this disruption. And I just think again about this idea of entitlement to like what our business is. Should we be here in the future? Of course, the answer is yes, right? But I don't think so. Like, I don't think it's a guarantee if people aren't participating in the act of change. And so I'm curious from your point of view, like of forced adaptation, things that people might do to disrupt themselves or not be disrupted, right, in the future, rather than waiting around for something gradual and comfortable to happen. And so just from your point of view, and I mean, maybe we start to transition really to talking about AI here. Like, what are you seeing with this kind of skills being uprooted and not needing people to do things, and the way that it's radically changing industries?
Right. Yeah. So first I'll say I'm very optimistic that there are some things that AI is never going to be able to do. AI is very constrained by the training data that we feed it. And there are that because of that, it kind of only knows the commodity kinds of things about the world. The things that lots and lots of people know and talk about publicly, or at least in places that have been scraped. And it's a small set of the stuff that we actually use to make decisions. So I think that AI will always struggle to do real problem solving. When you decide on the right solution to a problem, you're doing that with context in your head. What you saw yesterday, the conversation that you have with your wife or your partner, all the things that you imagine about the world, those things help you make decisions, and AI won't ever know those things. And so problem solving and decision making, and even just pulling the world to a new place that we're imagining we want to go, those are things that AI can't see. And so the kinds of things that we do as people are first process stuff. We do things over and over again. We get tasks done. We communicate about that work. We look for issues. And those three things, AI is going to be really good at. But the other three things, making decisions, solving problems, imagining a better world, AI won't ever do those things. So if you can sort of take your work and tease apart those first three things and the second three things, you'll start to see that your job just becomes problem solving over time. Your job is to look at the weird stuff that AI can't figure out what to do. Figure out what to do. All right, that's what your job over time will become. And I think that will exist forever. I think we'll always have safe, secure places as people in any industry, as long as we adapt what we do and give away some of the commodity stuff that AI is better at than us. Does that make sense so far? Before?
Yep.
I think the second thing I will say about it is, in most cases, when we look at some of the big technology things we got, phones were mostly mobile and app driven or mobile browsing now in the world. It's only been really 10, 12 years since we started that transition, and all of us became mobile capable fairly quickly. The internet, completely changed the way we looked for and shared information. After 10 years or so, we all became great at internet stuff. That will also happen with AI. We'll probably just gradually start embracing it. And 10 years from now, we'll say, okay, well, yeah, AI stuff is that's just how we get information now. I don't read long papers anymore. I just read the digest from my AI assistant. So that change will happen sort of slowly and gradually. So it shouldn't freak people out because you will have some, ramp toward that happening. But now if you resist it, right, and you try to say, but the CAD machine in the basement of Dan's first job, the drawings that come out of that are garbage. I'm not going to use CAD because the garbage designs that come out are not things that I would want to use. If you resist it completely and completely ignore it and don't expect that it will constantly get better, then you will become one of those draftsmen that I worked with in 1986 that never learned CAD, and that would have been bad for them, right?
Yeah. This idea, though, I think is exacerbated by the constant fire hose of news, right? Of you've got to do this right now. And so I'm curious from your perspective, like, how can you get by without having to really like dive in and become a deep committer to this kind of stuff? Like, what do you feel like is the best way to kind of experience that ramp that you're talking about?
Well, so first, there's a pretty hard line in time. November 2022. That's when ChatGPT first came out, right? And if you were in school in November of 2022, all of a sudden everyone said, "Hey, just put your homework in ChatGPT. You'll be amazed."
Yeah, students are always looking for the shortcut too, right? Like there's so much incentive to do so. Yeah.
Right. Yes, exactly. So if you are, I don't know what age that maybe makes you, 24 or younger. So you were in school on the ChatGPT day. All of a sudden you use ChatGPT for everything. There's no going back. Like you put every email in there, every social post, every article you write for the blog, every book you write, like you just use it. And so that age is entering the workforce. Those people are your coworkers, they're your competitors, and those people are AI powered already, full stop.
Yeah.
And so first, you don't have to go all the way there. You don't have to put every, design into some AI powered design assessment tool. But start dabbling with it, because one day you're going to wake up and your customers will choose not to award you an RFP. And you're going to find out it's because they went with this other team, and that other team is using some AI thing that you're not using. And so, you don't really need to change until your customers are picking the other people. That's when you have to.
Yeah.
And so anticipate that that's coming and start dabbling. Start playing around with it, start figuring out, what it could do for you, what you trust and what you don't trust. Start hiring some people that are 24 or younger and asking them what they think, what they do with it, and start the exploration. The next 5 years it's going to be an interesting flip. It'll be the fastest technology adoption, I think, that we've ever seen.
Yeah, that's an interesting graph to track, right? Because it was like, I think that there was a graph that showed like the telephone and adoption of the telephones in houses, right? Landline telephones versus like the cell phone. And I think the cell phone was like a tenth of the time, because it was like 50 years of adoption for landline telephony. And then you've got cell phones. And I mean, this is before smartphones, quote unquote smartphones, right? Like this was just like Nokia, right? Everybody had a Nokia pretty fast. And that was 2000. I don't know. That was a long time ago, right? Probably even before that. I mean, The Matrix 1999 had the cool slide out Nokia, Neo had that. And it was like cutting edge tech at that point, right? And you think about how fast like AI, since you said 2022, right? November, the end of 2022 is when ChatGPT rolled out, and now look at where it is, and it's the beginning of 2025, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Also I want to be clear. What AI can do right now is mostly language processing.
Mhm.
So if you're having a meeting with a bunch of people and you say a bunch of stuff, having an AI note taker in the room with you to log what was said in the meeting, what decisions were made, what action items were there, that's a great idea. It will transform the efficiency of communication across your team. If you're writing content and it's going to be read by people that are maybe outside of the US, maybe now you can publish content in 5 or 10 or 25 different languages, right? So you can reach your whole global audience instead of just the one you speak to in English. Those are things that already are working really, really great, and global teams should be doing those things already. In AEC, to have a structural engineering drawing and put it somewhere and say, like, what are the flaws in this drawing? That technology is really in its infancy right now. Like, we don't have that kind of stuff just isn't in the training data. And so when we say AI, I want to make sure I distinguish between language processing stuff and graphical image processing stuff. Because a lot of the design stuff that requires precision in images is still a long way off because that stuff wasn't enough in the training data. Now, companies like Autodesk and the others are going to make great things, but the road there is a little bit slower.
And just to kind of throw in some other ideas about what I've seen going on in the space is like very small teams developing language-based interfaces to produce code to build geometry in real time in your modeling application like Rhino and Grasshopper, right? But it's still language driven to code something that would normally take somebody a lot of trial and error or a lot of experience, right? You got to pay for that time to create this stuff either way versus, oh, I want it to, round off the corners on the 15 floors at the same time. And it creates the code that lets you execute that. And then you can use it again and again and again and again. And all of a sudden, like, you have to find ways to leverage the existing tools to do little things in the bigger picture as well. It's not just meeting notes. It's not just for project managers and people processing a lot of email. It can be for designers too, or without going full on down the IP role of like it generating potential design ideas that then there's like questions over where that came from and ownership and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or even just the structural integrity of the shape that your mid-journey design came from or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a great example. And that's, I think, another place where we could bring that cross-pollination of industry back. If you hired a random non-architect software engineer to come in and just like look over the shoulder.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
They would find amazing efficiency things that you're gonna overlook if you're not a software engineer. One of the things we always say about great software engineers are the laziest ones.
Yeah.
Right? They want to do the least amount of work possible, and so they'll find ways of like automating some of that stuff, and that will definitely help in AEC.
The question then is, can AEC afford those people, right? Because, but you get what you pay for on some level when it comes. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk more about creativity, because this idea you posted on LinkedIn and you talked about how AI, what creativity is, and then what you thought you've already got into this a little bit. What creativity will never do, and when it comes to caring, like that's a big one, right? You talked about that AI won't care, and so the thing that really interests me about this topic, or this framework of what AI can do as a tool and where do humans fit into that process, especially as architects, which is it's actually about the human experience. And then there's all this other stuff we have to do to make it actually physically work in the real world as architects, right? So Midjourney doesn't do that, right? It's images, and okay, maybe it thought us, it drew a picture that, I'm going to pursue that, go down that road, and then we can actually reverse engineer, and then, so take it a few steps back, interject some other client ideas, and then move forward and actually come up with something. But then there's this whole like, okay, we have to produce these drawings, we have to produce these details, we have to get it through the permitting process, we have to go through the bidding all these things that architects have to do. And so there's not a lot of threat there. But this idea of like what I like about this is that it actually brings us closer back to our true value as what architects can do, which is not just commodity stuff anymore.
Right.
Because the commoditization of design and tools, like it's gross, right? Like it's just we don't need more of that. We actually need architects to actually realize their true value and be able to apply their time and energy into that. And maybe this is a way to start doing that.
I think it is, right? I think because some of our processes are so heavy. There's so much stuff we have to do just to get the thing to the point at which it's built. Mm-hmm. There's one day at the beginning of the project that's super fun where you're like just sketching on a napkin or a notebook, and you're like, I can imagine this amazing building, this amazing space, gonna be so cool, and then the fun ends for like a year and a half.
Yeah, multiple years.
You have to do all that other crap to get your napkin sketch to life. What should happen, or what I'm optimistic that will happen, is that the painful stuff that shouldn't take as much human creativity and imagination and unique perspective and all that stuff, all the processing stuff should get automated so that you spend more time, doing the fun part at the beginning. And that makes me really excited about the AI future, not just in AEC, but like that I think will be true in medicine and in software engineering and all the other industries too.
Yeah, this idea of like younger generations and change, right? Like mm-hmm. the catalyst of change is when the bit flips and it's like, oh, there's some new people in charge now. And because I think a lot of people think, okay, well, yeah, you can spend more time on the project, and well, of course, we'll always that's actually what BIM did, right? It just allowed us to cram even more into the same bag as we had before, at more detail, more metadata, whatever it is, and all of that can be leveraged for good. And at the same time, like, what I like to think of it is like quality of life, right? Like you can decide how you want to spend that time. You could put it into the project. You could put it back into yourself. You could work less hours. You could go on that trip and get those experiences that then bring back to your projects, and you can build better architecture because you've had those experiences. And like, because all that actually feeds each other, right? It's in a positive way. And my hope is that we can actually use these tools as leverage so that we can have better experiences, so that we can provide better experiences, so that we can provide better products, and not just work more or work longer, because we've done that. And I think that's an interesting perspective from the younger generations as well. It's like, I'm not going to do it like that. Like I see how you do it, and I'm not interested in doing it like that. And a lot of people are leaving or not going into the industry because of that. But I think I'm hopeful that the ones that do actually will have a different way of approaching the way we've always done it.
I completely agree with that. I'm the parent of 3 sons. I have a 30-year-old and then 2 23-year-olds. And they're, as they come into the workforce now, they have a completely different mindset, right? Mm-hmm. They're not trying to work, their butt off for 50 years to get a gold watch and a pension. Like that's not their view of the world anymore. And they're going to approach work in a different way. They're going to find efficiencies in their own work and then split the dividend with their organization, right? Where they got some efficiency. So now I get a little bit more vacation time, and I can also do a little bit more work for your stakeholders. But then the dynamic has flipped for sure for some people younger in the workforce.
Yeah. Well, I'm hopeful in that way for sure. I'm just curious, maybe wrapping up here, what you're most excited about, or what you think maybe the biggest takeaways are. I'm sure even in the year and a half since you haven't been at Google, things have changed pretty radically. And so what I'm not looking for here is like you've even experienced this, right, with a year and a half of like how fast things
Mhm.
are moving, and so there's a lot of stuff that you probably even told people a year and a half ago that doesn't apply anymore, and so I'm trying to avoid a
Yeah.
little bit of that. But like bigger picture, what do you think some of the takeaways are from this kind of,
I think
you know,
I think one of the things that excites me the most is the ability for AI to help us communicate across language barriers more than we can right now.
mm,
Um, you know, a lot of the global economy transacts in English right now because it's the one language that lots of people know, and that's a little bit broken. There are 6 billion people that don't speak English at all, and those people can't read most textbooks that were written. They can't watch most YouTube videos. They can't like join most enterprises because they don't know how to understand the words that are being spoken. I think AI translation is going to democratize access to information in the world in ways that are super interesting.
kind of like the
It'll
internet
enable,
did, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. We'll probably in the next year have a toggle on our computer that lets us just flip the language that we hear and read when we get messages or when we join meetings. If we want to speak Mandarin, we're going to speak Mandarin, and everyone else will get English or Spanish or
In real
German.
time.
They like in real time,
Yeah.
yeah. Like those things already work in Teams. That functionality is already there. It's not widely used, but I think that's the thing that excites me the most because I think this is a big world, and lots of our organizations aspire to be global.
Hmm.
But our definition of global right now is a little bit broken, and it could be a lot more global than it actually is, and that's an exciting like human um, step change that makes me really really excited about the next decade.
So do you think then, based on that alone, that corporations and teams should be thinking about business very differently and who their customers could be and what their footprint is and those kinds of things? Because it's, you kind of framed it in this idea of sharing information, but like if you can speak Mandarin in real time and all you can actually speak is English in real time, that actually changes things pretty structurally to what's possible with your business.
I think that is exactly my advice for organizations. I think people are thinking about their customer market as way narrower than it actually is.
Hmm.
There's a whole continent of Africa, that's growing rapidly, like skipped over the non-digital ways of doing things, right? They jumped right to digital money. They jumped right to cell phones and never even installed telephone lines and cables. And um, there's a middle class in Africa that needs all the services that we all make every day here in the U.S. There's 1 billion people over there. Another 1 billion people in India, 1.5 billion people in China. That's just three of the countries,
Yeah.
Africa,
Yeah.
a continent. But there's a lot of opportunity, I think, out there in the world that this new way of exchanging information will enable, and I think that will be opportunity on both sides for us servicing them and for them joining the global economy.
And you've played with that a little bit. And I'm just, my question, I guess my final question is how much did you trust it, not knowing the Mandarin that you had it translate to?
Yeah. So a couple of things. All the translations that I've done so far with it, I've given to a native speaker, and they said there was one exception. In Spanish, I said the word team, and the word team that it changed was more like family than coworkers. And so that one word is the only flaw
Wow.
that I've ever found. It's
99.999%.
pretty close to accurate all the time. And it's certainly better than just not speaking to them in their language at all.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think a final thought, just thinking about like using multiple tools to check. Like I know a lot of people use ChatGPT to check its own work, right? But
Yeah,
then there's
yeah,
other
yeah.
ones too, and it's like,
Mhm.
okay, this tool did this. Now let's have this tool check its work, and then maybe a
Yeah,
third
yeah.
one, and like
Right, right.
between that and still the amount of time saved is just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting time. There's a lot of new stuff available to all of us. It can be scary because that's sometimes overwhelming. But also some of the things that it will drive will be amazingly empowering. It should give you more time in your own day for things like personal growth. It should allow you to reach bigger customers with better services and products. And, I think these things have the ability to change the world if we let them. So that's it's an exciting time.
Well, thanks, Dan. It's been a fun conversation. I definitely learned a lot. And I'll put links to everywhere people can get in touch with you. But if you want to mention it here in the audio portion still, go for it.
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find on the internet. I have a unique last name. It's Chuparkoff, Chuparkoff. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active, but also all the other places, Instagram, X, or my own website, danchuparkoff.com. So here I am. I'd love to start a conversation with any of you. It's fun stuff for me to talk about. So I appreciate you having me on, Evan. It's been fun.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, so let's wrap this up before you take off. At the beginning of this episode, I said that change agents must lead their teams through technological change, and that was validated throughout our conversation. Dan emphasized that technological change is inevitable, accelerating, and can be deeply disruptive without proactive leadership. So here are 7 examples from the conversation that back this up. Example number 1. Change is constant and accelerating. He described how technological advancement, especially with AI, is progressing faster than ever before. The tools available today weren't even possible just 2 years ago, and the pace of adoption is increasing. He said the next 5 years is going to be an interesting flip. It'll be the fastest technology adoption that we've ever seen. Change agents must lead here, or their organizations risk being left behind. Example number 2, resistance is common without leadership. Dan recalled his early experience in an architecture firm where CAD was initially rejected by architects despite its clear advantages. Without someone advocating for the long-term benefits of change, organizations tend to default to the status quo, even when it's less efficient. Example number 3, culture must ship before processes can. He emphasized that embracing new tools starts culturally, not procedurally, and that leadership has to create a safe, experimental environment. Change agents cultivate a growth mindset and empower their team to explore before formal adoption. Example number 4, legacy thinking stalls progress. Dan explained how older leaders nearing retirement often avoid change because they don't see the payoff within their timeline. In contrast, change agents are essential because they bridge the generational gap and prepare the organization for a sustainable future. Example number 5, isolation enables innovation. He discussed how creating a separate innovation group free from organizational inertia can succeed under proper leadership. Dan said, we created a little team that was separate. We had our own culture, our own mindset. We reinvented things and it was dramatically successful. Change agents lead by shielding innovation from internal resistance and giving it room to grow. I'll say that again. Change agents lead by shielding innovation from internal resistance and giving it room to grow. Example number 6, AI is already transforming workflows. Dan highlighted how younger generations are already natively using AI tools, and if change agents don't lead adoption, they risk becoming obsolete as clients and competitors move forward. And lastly, example number 7, without leadership, fear wins. Fear of the unknown or failure can paralyze teams. Dan and I both acknowledge that the fear is so real that it keeps a lot of people from trying new things. Change agents are the antidote to this fear, and they provide vision, permission, and momentum to move forward. So in conclusion, change agents are not optional in this era. They are mission critical for navigating rapid technological shifts, fostering curiosity, overcoming fear, and ensuring their organizations thrive rather than stagnate. That's it. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.